Hello, everybody. Welcome. Happy Tuesday morning here on our second day of Global Entrepreneurship Week Fort Worth. So happy you could join us this morning. We're kicking things off right with this Sparkyard event. My name is Marco Johnson. I'm one of the co-lead organizers of Global Entrepreneurship Week. Welcome. Thanks for being here. We have a really cool session for you this morning. I'm going to talk a little bit about Sparkyard and a couple of new assets that we have coming out that are available to everyone. And then I'm going to pass it over to my colleague who's going to interview an expert and they'll be talking more about some interesting things as well. So straight off the bat, what is Sparkyard, you might be asking? Sparkyard is a free resource, predominantly web-based, that helps connect entrepreneurs to the resources they need to launch their companies or grow their companies. So if you head over to sparkyard.co, you'll find our website. You're free to interact with us over the website. We also have a hotline. You can email us. We're here to help answer your questions and get you on the way to success. So please give us a shout. We're also on all the social media channels, so we'll see you there. So I mentioned that Sparkyard is predominantly a web-based platform. And that makes it really powerful because there's a lot of functionality, a lot of cool things that we can do in terms of providing tools and assets, not only for entrepreneurs, but for ecosystem builders or policymakers or anybody who's interested in building our entrepreneurial ecosystem and building our startup community. So one of the cool things that we're getting ready to launch is what we're calling the Sparkyard Growth Circuit. And I've got some examples here, and we'll put these up for you to see. But this is a map, and it explains the entrepreneurial journey. Here's a poster we've got here, and here's some handouts that we have of the same thing. You'll be able to see these around town at our partners. Anybody who's there to help entrepreneurs launch or grow their companies is going to have one of these up on the wall. And essentially what it's doing is explaining the route, the journey that an entrepreneur takes, starting here with your idea and inception, and as you grow the company and get customers and validate your product or your service, grow, get investment, get loans, and then as you finish the circuit on this side, you're in a mature company, maybe you're exiting. But this is a great asset or a great resource to take a look at and see what is that entrepreneurial journey. And this is phase one. So this is a very basic version, and phase two is coming out in early 2021, where we'll actually list the different resources that are located at each of these stops on the growth circuit. So we're really excited about that. Like I said, you'll be able to see these all over town, all over Tarrant County, at our partners' offices. And if you would like to find one on the website, we have that available for you to download or just to view. So take a look for that. We're really excited about this. The second thing that we're launching here during Global Entrepreneurship Week is what we're calling our ecosystem dashboard. And that sounds pretty fancy and pretty high tech. And it is. And it's really cool. And it's so cool that I can't even talk about it well. So I'm going to let my colleague Cameron Cushman take a shot at that, and he's got an expert here who Cameron will introduce in just a moment. So here he is, without further ado, my colleague and your ecosystem builder for Fort Worth, Cameron Cushman.
Well, thanks, Marco. Really appreciate that introduction and love the great work that Sparkyard is doing to bring some of these new resources to our entrepreneurial ecosystem here in Fort Worth. If you haven't checked out sparkyard.co, be sure and check it out. You can connect to all kinds of resources through the Resource Navigator. You can also find access to all the great tools that he just talked about, including the Sparkyard Growth Circuit, which will help all entrepreneurs navigate their own path for moving their business forward, starting their company, and hopefully decreasing their chances of failure and increasing their chances of success. One of the things that Marco mentioned too is our ecosystem dashboard that we're going to be launching here very soon. And it's going to talk about some of the metrics that we are gathering on the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Fort Worth, Tarrant County, and North Texas in general. And I have with me today a real expert on the topic, a real pioneer in this idea that you can actually measure entrepreneurial ecosystems and that you can begin to change policies and investments and things like that and actually move the needle on some of this, see how your ecosystem is doing, and then see how you can affect that change. So our expert today is Dane Stangler with Shuttlecock Consulting, but he's also worked at Startup Genome, which is a group that did this internationally, and the Ewing Marion Kauffman Foundation in Kansas City, which was really the premier think tank for a lot of this work around entrepreneurship. So Dane, welcome to Global Entrepreneurship Week Fort Worth. You're joining us from Kansas City, but tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Thanks, Cameron. Happy GEW to you and everyone there. It's great to be joining you for this. As Cameron said, I worked at the Kauffman Foundation for a long time, for 12 and a half years. Worked on a variety of things. I ran the research and policy department there as well. I worked at Startup Genome for 3 years. At Startup Genome, we did data analytics and policy consulting for entrepreneurship ecosystems around the world. And now I spend a lot of my time working for a think tank in Washington and various other consulting projects.
Outstanding. So Dane, start us off by telling us why this is important. Why should anyone care, be it a college student to a successful entrepreneur to the mayor or a policymaker? Why should anyone care about their entrepreneurial ecosystem and the data and the measurement that goes into that?
Sure. The most basic reason, Cameron, is the reason we're all here participating in GEW events. And that is because entrepreneurship, the creation, the growth, the survival, and the operation of new companies is economically crucial for our cities, our counties, our states, and our countries. It's the principal source of job creation, principal source of innovations and wealth creation, just at a high level. That's why we should all care about our entrepreneurial ecosystems. Measurement is usually not the most attractive of topics when it comes to entrepreneurship, when it comes to these efforts, but especially for policymakers and especially for program operators, we want to know if what we're doing is making a difference. That's why we're all in this work. That's why we're devoting ourselves to entrepreneurship. That's why many of us are volunteering. That's why many of us are working for lower pay than we could be getting in other jobs to run an entrepreneurship support organization or a competition. We want to have an impact, and measurement helps us determine if we are having an impact, and if not, or if we're not having the impact we want to have, what we can do differently.
Outstanding. That makes a ton of sense. And Dane, I know that one of the ways policymaker thinks is through jobs and job creation. When you were at the Kauffman Foundation, I know that one of the projects you worked on was really pioneering work around the role that new companies, new firms play in job creation at the national level. Tell me a little bit about that research and how that kind of informed some of the policy work by the Kauffman Foundation and others in the years since then.
Yeah, Cameron, as you know, and as everyone watching this and everyone participating in GEW around the world knows, 12 years ago, we went through a massive recession and financial crisis. At that time, we were obviously working on entrepreneurship at Kauffman and other organizations as well, but we didn't really have much of an idea as to what effect that recession, that crisis would have on entrepreneurs, because we didn't have data to answer that question. We also didn't know what the potential role of entrepreneurs would be in the recovery, because we didn't have good data on the past role of entrepreneurs in recovery out of recession. And so, we kind of just asked ourselves some really simple questions, exactly those. What impact will this have on entrepreneurs, and what impact can entrepreneurs have on the economy? That then set in motion a number of initiatives to get better data, to collect better data, to do better with the data that we had, and then to figure out the answers to those questions. And so we wrote some papers, and the papers themselves were just asking really basic questions. Like the name of one paper was just, where will the jobs come from? Because we had lost so many jobs and we're losing so many jobs. And the answer to that question at that time, and continues to be, jobs come from new companies, young companies, and as a sub cohort, new and young companies that grow. And so entrepreneurship really is the key catalyst for new net job creation. So the jobs that are left over after jobs are created and destroyed and replaced, that happens all the time. But entrepreneurs are responsible for those net jobs that are added to the economy on a quarterly and an annual basis.
That's fascinating. Well, and Dane, one of the things that we didn't know in Fort Worth, we didn't know in Tarrant County, was that number. We didn't know how many jobs new companies were creating every year in Fort Worth. And as a part of Global Entrepreneurship Week, we actually have announced some new research that we partnered up with our good friends at SourceLink in Kansas City to replicate a report that they did in Kansas City on the number of jobs created by new firms. And as it turns out, and Dane, this was kind of a shocking number for all of us, in Tarrant County, which Fort Worth is the largest of the municipalities in Tarrant County, new firms, which they defined as ages 0 to 1, so these are your newest of your new companies, created about 25,000 jobs a year. And that number was really consistent over the last 6 years. And the interesting thing is, too, just to put that in perspective, if you think about all the economic development hoopla that came around Amazon HQ2 and the 50,000 jobs that was going to potentially bring to the lucky community that was going to win that deal, if you compare that to the last 6 years in Fort Worth, it would be 3 times more jobs that were actually created instead of a promise of what Amazon was going to bring in the future. So I think that just kind of puts it in perspective. So that's probably a way bigger number than most policymakers realize. Does that number surprise you? And how should we in Fort Worth kind of interpret and think about that number?
Well, all good things, of course, come from Kansas City, Cameron. So I'm glad you guys turned to the good folks at SourceLink to answer that question. I think that's the thing about this kind of research is the numbers that come out of the data analysis are, on the one hand, surprising, just because of the sheer volume of jobs created. So if you haven't thought about, that part of your economy yet, about the small companies, the young companies, the new companies, the number is surprising just to see it, 25,000, a big number. I think it's not, necessarily surprising for those of us who are, like yourself and others who are doing this on a daily basis, that we know that they're creating jobs. Now, it really is striking when you see it all added up, because you have your head down every day, you're running an incubator, you're running an accelerator, competition, you're helping entrepreneurs every day. And so it doesn't surprise you that jobs are being created, but to see it all total up like that, you're like, wow, I am having a huge impact. So I think that number is a testament to the efforts of so many people in the Fort Worth community, just like it is everywhere.
That's great. So we've established kind of why this is important. We've talked about probably one of the most important metrics that particularly policymakers care about, which is jobs. What are some of the other metrics that one would want to look at to kind of gauge the health and the performance of their entrepreneurial ecosystem?
Yeah, we did a little bit of work on this at Kauffman. Cameron, as you remember, we put out a paper that was, I think the name of the paper was just measuring entrepreneurial ecosystems, or again, something basic like that. And then we did some subsequent grant making after that paper. And then this was something that I continued to work on as part of the team at Startup Genome. And so obviously job creation is a big one. And that is a key yardstick for policymakers, as you mentioned. It's also a key yardstick because that's what's getting measured in every other economic development effort as well. But there are lots of things when it comes to startups, when it comes to entrepreneurs, that don't have a comparable yardstick. So I think there's a couple of challenges here. One is we want to define metrics or indicators that are meaningful for the public and private sectors that tell us how we're doing. And we also want to have metrics that, to the best we can, are comparable to other economic development metrics, so that we are able to not just tell the story, but, as you discussed, compare that story to the other economic development efforts. Not to make them seem bad, but just to compare, here's how the efforts do here's how they add up to each other. So job creation is an important one. We want to measure entry. We just want to measure how many new businesses are coming in to existence in Tarrant County, in Fort Worth, at a state level, at a country level. We want to measure entrepreneurial density. So it's not just a volume of new companies. We also want to know, compared to the size of our economy, the size of our population, compared to other places, do we have a critical mass of entrepreneurs? Because we know from an ecosystem perspective, while it's important to have a steady pipeline of new companies entering, if you are not getting that density, which is going to lead to networks, which is going to lead to strong connectedness, that might hurt and undermine some of your other efforts to build the ecosystem. So those are the things we want to measure around entry. We also want to measure growth. Job creation is part of that. We also want to know our companies, the companies that are coming into existence, are they not just adding jobs in that first year of their life, the age 0 to 1? Are they continuing to grow? And as a cohort, are they adding jobs? We know there's plenty of research that has established this, both stuff we did at Kauffman and others, that about half of those companies that come into existence aren't going to survive past the 5-year mark. Many of those that do survive, they're going to stay small, and that's totally fine. That is not a bad thing. But we want to know, of those surviving companies from that cohort, is some subset of them continuing to grow. So it's important to look at that layer too, not just the base layer when they come in, but then what happens 2, 3, 5, 10 years down the line. And then lastly, I would add, there's a ton of things we want to measure in the kind of support organization universe to see if we're having an impact and where we need to kind of tinker. And then really important, especially today, is we want to know if we're getting entrepreneurial participation from all parts of our county or our city. So are the pathways of entrepreneurial opportunity open and clear to everyone across demographic lines, across geographic lines, even within a city, and across income lines? So that entrepreneurial diversity across a number of different dimensions is important as well.
That makes sense. Okay, so Dane, one of the things that we asked you to look into for us as a part of this project, building the ecosystem dashboard, is an analysis of Fort Worth. And I know that we got you started with some data that we've released on the Sparkyard.co blog around early stage funding, around total number of firms started. Now we have this job creation research. We also looked at the Inc. 5000 data of the fastest growing firms in Fort Worth. But you're the real expert. So we found the data. But can you kind of tell us what that means? Tell us what that raw data meant to you as you think about this in terms of ecosystems and development and what that looks like.
Yeah. So first, let me give a shout out to you and your team, who has done a great job in both working with outside groups like SourceLink, but also doing a lot of internal data collection and analysis and comparison yourselves. So it was really good to work with talented and well-informed team. So I think for the indicators that we looked at for Fort Worth and for Tarrant County, and just a small footnote on that, Cameron, as you've already hinted at, is some of this data is available at the city level, some's only available at the county level, some's only available at the MSA level, so roping in Dallas. So with data measurement, you're kind of always addressing those geographical boundaries and unit levels of analysis. So we looked at a number of different indicators. We looked at the new business creation, we looked at equity funding, we looked at job creation, pulling from public sources, pulling from private sources as well. And currently we have those bucketed into just two kind of main categories. One is entrepreneurial density, so that entry, that population of new firms, and then the other is the growth. So looking at job creation, looking at the pulling from that Inc. 5000 list, and also looking at the equity funding aspect of it, to try to determine where Fort Worth stands on that pipeline of high growth companies. So within those two buckets, we've broken it down into, I think 3 or 4 metrics each. And so are looking not just at Fort Worth on its own in Tarrant County, but also trying as best we can where the data are available to see how Fort Worth and Tarrant County, stack up and compare both to other places, but also to the potential, the entrepreneurial potential of the city and the county itself. So if we saw more companies here, more growth here, what would that mean in terms of economic impact?
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so what did you see maybe as you kind of looked at this? I mean, you've done work on ecosystems around the world, and I know we've kind of ranked Fort Worth as to where it fits in in relation to the top 50 cities by population. Fort Worth is the 13th largest city in the country, but we're not doing near that well on some of the early funding as we compared it. But what do you see as maybe some strengths of the Fort Worth entrepreneurial ecosystem from what you've seen in the data, and maybe some things that we have to work on?
Sure. So now we'll start with the strengths first. Great institutional assets in Fort Worth. And you see some of that reflected in the data. So you already mentioned the job creation number for Tarrant County. Huge number of jobs coming from new firms. That is far better than if we were to look at the data, obviously, and find that, oh gosh, you are not getting job creation from, young firms. So that entrepreneurial pipeline, that existing base of entry and new job creation is there. So this is not a case where, oh my God, we got to figure out how to, stimulate entrepreneurship in Fort Worth and Tarrant County. It's happening. So that's a huge strength. You've obviously got assets like the university, like Sparkyard, and some of the other emerging organizations, that are growing up around this. As you've told me, as I've learned from you, you also have a good base of entrepreneurial experience, knowledge. We tried to measure this at Startup Genome as an indicator called startup experience. People in the ecosystem who have taken a startup from birth to growth, have gone through an exit, have raised money, have been an investor. And I've learned from you that there is a good deal of startup experience in the ecosystem in terms of individuals who have kind of been or are doing it for the ecosystem. Every ecosystem has opportunities for improvement or areas to grow. One of the things that we see in the data in Tarrant County, so again, this looking at the county level, is kind of despite that strong base of entrepreneurial entry, if we look at the last, so I'm looking at a chart here, the last 13 years or so, a dozen years, is that share of jobs in those youngest firms. So here, looking at those 0 to 1 firms, has kind of stayed a bit flat, even as the share of jobs in the oldest firms has increased a bit. So there's an interesting dynamic there between the oldest and biggest firms in Tarrant County and the newest firms. And if you look, Tarrant County is actually underperforming the rest of the state on that measure in terms of in the youngest firms. So I think that's just a clue, right? That doesn't tell you anything about the why, about the dynamics, but that's how we can use the data, the indicators to say, okay, let's go dig what's going on here and start to parse out some of the dynamics rather than going in blind and just be like, all right, entrepreneurship, where do we begin? Now we have some clues about where to go for some of those opportunities for growth and improvement.
That's great. And taking a page from what we were just talking about too, about kind of the unicorns, the high growth startups. One of the things that I know that you found was that we had a relatively healthy early stage seed and angel investment activity, but then kind of the second stage, the more institutional, the more venture capital, Series A, Series B, that was kind of falling off. That was kind of lacking. And I know you have a great chart that we can put in here too of you kind of have the ideal and then you have what you found in Fort Worth. Can you kind of walk us through that a little bit?
Yeah, so this is again one of those places where you run into, as as your team knows, into data availability issues. So if we're comparing Fort Worth, you want to compare Fort Worth on kind of two axes here. You want to compare it to its own history and potential trajectory. And there, as you have hinted, we see in the data some positive movement and some very encouraging movement in Fort Worth in terms of a strong pipeline of those angel and seed deals, and then down the road, downstream, a strong pipeline in terms of the Series A and then the later stage rounds. And if you kind of think about how an ecosystem develops, you want to have a lot of small bets being made at those early stages, at the angel and seed stage, small dollar amounts, because a young company is not going to need presumably $5 million early on, but could use 100,000 in angel, $500,000 in seed. And then as downstream, you want fewer, because you're presumably getting surviving, but larger size deals in terms of dollar amounts. And so when we kind of look at that comparison of Fort Worth, over the time period analyzed, we certainly saw encouraging movement in Fort Worth in terms of the angel seed deals and the downstream effects, both in deal volume and in deal size. The other axis you want to compare any ecosystem on is how are we doing compared to other, ecosystems that we want to compare ourselves to, right? This was a big point of emphasis at Startup Genome, is those comparisons have got to be meaningful. There are too many places that compare ecosystems only to like Silicon Valley or London, right? And it's like, well, only a handful of places should be compared to those. So we want to make meaningful comparisons. And if we take Fort Worth and look at it in comparison to other cities in Texas, for example, we see a lot of room for growth, a lot of potential. Is Fort Worth, does it want to go a trajectory, of Austin? Is there a trajectory of Houston or Dallas? Those are different pathways because of the different dynamics. So we can certainly see some of the areas where Fort Worth is in the right direction, but there's still a lot of opportunity for growth, specifically in terms of the equity funding deals and the dollars.
Very good. Well, I think that's a great place to leave it, Dane. Dane Stangler from Shuttlecock Consulting, and like I said, one of the really world's top experts. I know you hate it when I say that about you, but it's entirely true in this field of data collection around entrepreneurial ecosystems. And Dane, thanks for joining us on this event. Happy Global Entrepreneurship Week there in Kansas City. I'm hoping Fort Worth's going to end up with more events than Kansas City will, but we'll see. And thanks again for joining us. We will be sure and let everybody know once the entrepreneurial ecosystem dashboard is live on the Sparkyard website, and hopefully we'll have a bunch more fun stuff to share on the Sparkyard website in the next few days and weeks to come.